The F1 season is nearly upon us, with testing this week giving us an awful lot to look forward to, and yet somehow the main news going around is about the garish fanfare of the F1 75 launch event. Don't get me wrong, a centralized revealing of the cars isn't inherently a bad idea, and hell, making a show of it is obviously going to reflect well on the sport publicly and will be of great value to the shareholders, I'm sure. But the last thing that true fans of the sport want is a WWE event serving as a launch. Garish, tacky, and incredibly tone-deaf, and that's just the hosting, but the real talking point following the event is the treatment of Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Is it a sign of where the sport is going? As it gets more dramatized and processed to generate outrage, is Formula 1 teetering on the edge of pushing some of its biggest talents out in favor of a spectacle? Or are those who act up being held accountable by a fanbase who have caught on to their BS? Want to know why F1 may be pushing Max Verstappen away? It could just be that he can't handle the consequences of his actions, but does that make the events of the F1 75 event justified? And stick around because the FIA is stepping in after a boycott has been threatened. So the F1 75 event was a pretty mixed bag, being opened up by none other than MGK for some reason, someone with the most embarrassing grid walk appearance of all time. The event started as it meant to go on. Don't get me wrong, getting to hear from the drivers, principals, and see the cars from multiple angles rather than just a press release was pretty sweet, with a particular favorite being the Williams reveal, but the overall feel of the event was very garish and Americanized. It's no surprise that it was put on by the same people responsible for the cringe-worthy inaugural Las Vegas showcase, but it seems that they've learned a lot since then. The Netflix factor, however, is something that couldn't be escaped, as it appeared that the crowd was made up of people who weren't exactly neutral fans. Booing is nothing new to the sport. As far back as Sebastian Vettel during his dominant reign, people have been booing dominant drivers, but the booing of Red Bull at the F1 75 launch was just quite embarrassing. It wasn't everyone, but there was a vocal section of the audience who decided to boo the four-time world champion, and it resulted in him being less than eager to attend these events in the future. Now, before we fully get into this, one thing that is worth mentioning is that Verstappen fans shouldn't exactly be clutching their pearls here. You just need to look at the reaction that Red Bull's rivals have received over the years, such as Lewis Hamilton being booed in Mexico City and the traveling Dutch fans around European rounds, such as the Hungaroring in 2021. It does not legitimize the booing in England, but it's all just as childish and tiresome as each other, with no side in this being capable of any kind of moral high ground. All the finger-pointing, villainizing, and pearl-clutching is a direct result of the growth of the sport, and it's something that may well start putting people off, both professionals and fans alike. According to Jos Verstappen, following the event, Max isn't exactly eager to make a return to this kind of event in the future. Max has no appetite for that, to be booed like that in front of 25,000 people. He also says, if this is in England next year, they definitely won't see me. I couldn't agree more with him. You're there to promote the sport and showcase the new color schemes of the cars, but then they go on a rampage like that. The question is, what are you there to do? He has to get ready to go there anyway, but then you get booed like that. I think they should take a hard look at that, because that doesn't belong in this sport. Jos would also say, I get it because Max is the only one who fires up those Englishmen and says exactly where it's at, but that's kind of beside the point and probably doesn't help the situation. Max and Red Bull weren't booed because of some nationalist pride. They were booed because Max shunts people off the road as a tactic, and Red Bull, especially Christian Horner in recent years, haven't exactly painted themselves in a positive light and endeared themselves to the wider F1 fanbase. While the Red Bull fans have ultimately bought into the us versus them mentality, and those that enjoy the drama likely enjoyed seeing the team spontaneously combust last year, the overall reputation that Red Bull have built for themselves has ultimately made them somewhat easy to dislike. And hey, this is me talking as someone that actually likes Red Bull. They are my local team here in Milton Keynes. And given that the travelling support for Max is more than happy to boo his competitors, it's fair to say that we doubt his dad would be quite so vocal about, say, a British driver being booed in the future. Booing F1 drivers will always be cringy, no matter who it's coming from, but we expect that the way the sport has been going over the past few years, that this isn't going to be the last time that we're going to hear it. Regardless of the boos, the best thing that Red Bull can do is get their house in order, and Jos would do well not to speak to the media and add to the circus every time there is something he disagrees with, as it is certainly not helping. all of the talk about how abhorrent the booing is, the weird nationalist angle, and the victim mentality all ignore the fact that only one team was being booed. Nobody was booing Williams and Alex Albon, nobody booed McLaren and Lando Norris, and nobody was booing Mercedes and George Russell. Could it maybe be that Red Bull have somewhat made their bed here? On-track antics which don't reflect well on the team or the driver, the behind-the-scenes clown show, and the general lack of likability at the team hasn't exactly warranted a warm reception. So even if the booing isn't the right thing to do, which I certainly do not think it's the right thing to do, maybe Red Bull could have done more to prevent the lightning rod that is now affixed to their reputation. Blaming an entire nation for a small group of vocal haters is just going to further isolate Max and the team when the whole situation could have just been coolly brushed off, as Christian Horner did on the night. The team boss handled the situation with dignity and actually endeared himself to the audience by saying, "Well, it's fantastic to be here at the O2 anyway." And it could have just ended at that. Jos Verstappen did what he has constantly done over the past few years. Done nobody any favors, alienated the team and Max further by speaking out emotionally, rather than letting the team and his son speak for themselves. Jos has been quite eager to speak to the media, as he has been constantly adding fuel to the fire, and will only serve to further isolate his son and further incentivize a negative reaction towards him in the future. Another group not exactly infused by the booing at the O2 Arena, but actually had a positive outcome towards it, was the FIA, who have since delivered a statement about the crowd's reaction to Red Bull's livery reveal. It's quite refreshing to hear from the governing body without the words fired, sacked, or mutually agreed parting of ways being involved, and I have to say, I think they hit the nail on the head with their call for respect. Great rivalries throughout the history of motorsport have contributed to making it such an exciting experience for fans, but what underpins sport at all levels is a culture of respect. As such, it was disappointing to hear the crowd's tribalist reaction to the FIA Formula 1 world champion Max Verstappen and his Red Bull team principal and CEO Christian Horner at the F1 launch in London. Max and Christian have both contributed greatly to the sport that we love. In the season ahead, we should not lose sight of that. As part of the FIA's commitment to protect the integrity of the sport, we are leading a coalition tackling online abuse in the sport under the banner of our United Against Online Abuse campaign. We stand with all of our competitors, officials, volunteers, and fans to unite against the growing threat. We urge the sporting community to consider the impact of their actions both online and offline. We cannot agree more with what the FIA have said, because like we have said, booing F1 drivers is just pretty cringy and is something that we expect people to do to people in spandex and face paint. In a way, the booing in such a public setting may well have incentivized a positive outcome for the sport. The FIA pushing back against this kind of behavior is something that fans of the sport should welcome, is something which is somewhat at odds with Liberty Media's approach to the sport, where the big show attitude, where outrage, drama, and the over-egging of the pudding are all actively encouraged. Yes, the Netflix series and general showmanship attached to it has been good for the growth of the sport, but if it's going to attract an attitude where you boo the guy that you don't like and lick the boots of your favorite millionaire, no matter who that is, then I think a bit of balance to keep the sport away from being such a caricature is something which should be welcomed, no matter who you support. So, in summary, booing is cringe. Jos shouldn't speak out on behalf of Max and the team, and the FIA has actually done something good for once. But what do you think? Do you think Max is actually hated by an entire country? Or is it just a vocal minority who should be pointed at and called morons by the wider F1 community? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.